Okay, let's get started. Just to give a bit of introduction for myself, as the managing director of the Dingle group and wider team, I've been part of, in the technology world for a very long time. From starting way back as an engineer to enterprise architect, then running consulting businesses. But really, my focus has been for the last 20 odd years is around strategy and operational excellence. Been part of the identity world, came in the last, since about 2018, 2017, particularly around the decentralized identity, but focusing more on the business values and policy values. First I'll have my panelists introduce themselves. Then the tone in the conversation we want to take this today is not so much on the hardcore tech, but around the business and operational values of what this technique can do. So please, Svez.
Thank you. So, hey, I'm Svez. I'm one of the co-founders of OutDID, spelled OUTDID over there. And for the last year and a half, we've been specializing in privacy solutions for identity verification. So imagine doing KYC, but without sharing your name or your private data to anyone to do that KYC, like the holy grail of KYC for the Web3. So I specifically specialized before this in research around privacy and scalability, so specifically around zero-knowledge proofs as well. And so I can talk from a technological angle, but this panel will mostly cover the use cases of these entities.
Okay, thank you. I'm Sebastjan from Netis, the Slovenian blockchain development company. We are in the blockchain from its beginning, and in the last couple of years we are focusing on building the product around the decentralized identity, and which covers all the aspects, not just for the user, but also for the companies who will be using the framework. So, and we also work with the EBSI project, and we really try to follow and deliver everything what they're trying to deliver to enable the companies and the users to really explore the benefits of the technology. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So when we were talking beforehand, we were trying to bring out the value that the technology can enable or unlock within a business or in the public sector, because it's not just the private sector that can leverage this. In the Web3 context, the bridging from Web 2 to Web 3, whether that's Web 5 or something else, God knows, but part of it is educating, whether you call them the buyer, right? If that is someone in the business or someone in the government, to actually spend and invest the money. So where do you see some of the value points? If you want to start, and we'll sort of, just as a sidebar, I prefer to run this as a conversation, okay? So expect us to interrupt each other and maybe talk over each other very rudely, but to have that type of conversation. And certainly if anybody out there has an opinion or a question, raise your hand, feel free, we'll toss you a mic. Well, we won't really toss it, but we'll get you a mic. And so interaction is the most important in engagement. So where do you see the value? What value unlocks with this?
So you're pretty much on point here. The biggest challenge in the whole DAD/VC industry right now is that everyone's building, but what are they building for? They're building infrastructure, amazing, lots of technology, amazing products, but what is the tangible real-world use case, which doesn't involve around serving other Web3 projects or serving other Web3 people, because that's just 0.1% of the population, right? So how can you create distinguished value proposition? And like Mike said, in a way where an established business which poured millions or billions into an alternative solution would find it worthwhile to write that off and actually find an alternative solution. So what I specialize in is privacy. So I can talk about privacy, but there's many more angles that we'll cover in the discussion. So when it comes to privacy, typically the users have a concern about privacy in relation to their personally identifiable information being shared around with third parties for no good reason. For example, you have to prove that I'm not a US citizen to purchase a token. I don't need to give them my whole ID. So there's a user push. On the business side, storing PII is considered toxic. It's toxic waste. It doesn't really win you any money. You can track people anyways, and it just creates liabilities with huge fines. And so finding that sweet spot of where PII is being shared, but it doesn't have to be, it's not required by regulations, it's not required by the business to make money, for example, is where it's at if you want to sell a private identity solution today. And now, there's not too many use cases for this right now. So one of the interesting ideas is actually online devices. So if you're going for adult entertainment, there's new regulations which just got put in place in I think Utah in the US, where Pornhub got banned because they were forced to do KYC for age verification. And so that's an interesting use case, and it shows a trend how the internet will slowly move to a more permission state, for better or for worse. But that's an opportunity that DIDs and VCs can capture because we can verify internet users, that they are over 18, that they're not bots, like for example, what Twitter and Facebook wants to do, like not bot, or prove that your name really is the name of your account, without falling on a third party to do these ID checks, because then the internet becomes essentially gatekept.
I mean, yeah, I agree with Michael that we will need to find the right language to sell the framework, because there are numerous examples where we see that existing infrastructure is not working anymore. We see that you have a great infographic displaying what's happening with the data breaches from the beginning of the internet, and there were a couple of bubbles in the beginning, and then things just are exploding in the last year. So we see that this centralized solution, which is mainly used today, is not working anymore. So we really need to, to find a way how to bridge from this Web 2 to Web 3, which is something that we are doing. So. So I agree that it's really important to find the way to educate the governments and the companies, of course also the users who are part of the triangle of the trust. And we also need to find the simple use cases to explain to people, to the companies and all mentioned, what this can do.
So where, I mean, things are happening. So you've just mentioned the law in Utah. In the UK, Ofcom is about to go in, is in review and discussion. If you're not familiar with Ofcom, it's a regulatory body that's been set up in the UK dealing with similar issues about access, particularly on the internet, and being able to prove age of majority, whatever that is in the UK, I believe it's 18. Certainly there's the change of regulation in the EU with the eIDAS version 2. The world is changing, our digital world, the recognition that we are becoming much, much more digital first, or truly digital. Some terms are digitalization versus digitization. Where do you see the resistance points if you're working with your clients or your customers? Who's got doubts?
I mean, if we approach to a company and say to them strictly just, we are privacy preserving, we are giving the power to the consumer, and they will be the owners of the data, the first thing they think, oh, this is our data, because they are now sitting on this data, they own this data, they use it, they monetize through it, and we approach to them and say to them, okay, now forget everything, users are now in control. So I think this approach is not the right one. So we are, in a way, the first probably obstacle to the success, trying to find the right language, as I said before. But yeah, there's also, the big tech, like if you look Google and Facebook and all these platforms who are now, holding this data and also monetizing. It's a business model for them, and they will be the one. We probably don't see it yet, but they will be the obstacle probably, because this can change everything for them. So yeah, maybe these two.
I agree. And effectively, to step on top of this, there's a chicken and egg program with DIDs, right? You've got the issues of these identities, and that's one part. You've got the users who have to hold them. You've got the verifiers, the companies which want to use them. So far, there's a bunch of projects which have cut off the issuers. So there's now ways, for example, to bridge your physical government ID directly as a DID without going through an issuer. Or you can bridge your online bank account history, which has nothing to do with DIDs and VCs, and then you can issue a DID using it, again, without going through a third-party issuer. That's effectively what we're doing at OutDID with government IDs. So you can take that part of the equation, and then the users don't really care. So the users will only do it if the business asks them to do it. And so therefore, how do you get the business to do it? And so they don't really intrinsically care about privacy. It has to make money. It has to put them in compliance. It has to reduce cost. And so when it comes to, DIDs, you could say it reduces cost because people can just prove that they have a bank statement, and instead of you having to actually hire a company to review this. So that's one point. But probably one of the easier vectors to start with is to say put them in compliance. So
just a couple, from one point of a clarification, then a slight twist on the question. DID, when you say, is more digital ID, right, versus decentralized identifier. Just want to be careful here because we have, I know within parts of the community, of the identity community as a whole, there's reuse of a term which can cause confusion. So just to make that clarification, right? When you say you're meaning more of a digital identity versus a decentralized identifier, correct? Is that a true statement?
Well, I mean, let's say a decentralized identifier plus verifiable credentials.
Yeah, okay. All right, so the combination.
So,
okay.
and you can call it the VC at the digital identity if you want, which is, it could be VC over an ID card.
Yeah, okay. So coming to the Web3 side, the decentralized identity community, the SSI community, has certainly come out of the Web3 world. That's the origin, the opportunity created from a DLT to actually truly shift the creation and control back to the individual away from a centralized or federated model was unlocked or enabled by the DLT technology. But as per the standards, the W3C standards, neither of those actually require a DLT. They very clearly calls a credential repository, which does not have to be a DLT. The Web3 community at large, identity has not necessarily been a very, what's the right word, sought for, cared for attribute. Is that a fair statement? If you say, I'm thinking of my exposure and working within the community back 2017, 2018, identity, people really didn't care, I'll be honest, right, in the Web3 world. Has that changed?
What do you mean by identity when you say they didn't care about it?
Well, there was that sort of rebel attitude to start about, this is anonymous, pseudonymous. I'll give the one finger salute to the regulator and the man, so to speak. I think that's changing, but there's still this element where recognition of the importance of actually knowing with confidence or assurance as to who the transaction is. It does also rub the wrong way, I think, with a large part of the community.
It does, but I think there's a growing minority, potentially majority, which understand the value that having some sort of identification, doesn't have to be, this is my name, is valuable. For example, many DAOs, they want to be decentralized, but 60% of their tokens is owned by the investors and the founders. So you want to have non-plutocratic voting, for example. You want to identify who's a unique human. Well, that's a consequence of using some part of identifier. And or we can talk about the regulatory push, KYC, AML, et cetera, et cetera. That's another identification.
Okay. No, I'm just, it's one of these questions that it's certainly been in my head as to, within the Web3, is it shifting? I will admit I'm not as, my focus over the last few years has been more specifically around the decentralized identity and that world. And quite frankly, all of these worlds are moving so fast and getting so big that it's hard to keep your head around everything. So you have to focus in areas.
I mean, one thing which will probably shift and display as a huge use case, and people will try to to follow things more massively, is maybe the project of the European Commission, because the Commissioner von der Leyen announced like in 2021 or something like that, or 2020 even, I don't know, that all the Europeans will got its own wallet, and privacy is important for us, and cutting in a way America and all the different this strategic place going on. Yeah, I think this will this is now something that is piloting. They're building the wallet. They put out the specifications how this wallet should look like, and this will be something when all the states, European states, will deliver the wallets to the users, to the whole population, like 300 million wallets in a way. This will be something that that will not just come to the radar of the consumers, but also the companies and governments. And it's important to know that what Commission is trying to do, that they are following what EBSI is trying to build, the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure project, which is also going on for the last 5 years. They are trying to, build the framework for the entities who are issuing the credentials, and the verifiers who will be verifying the credentials, and the trust framework, which can be DLT or blockchain or not, and also the wallet. So what von der Leyen announced is following what EBSI is doing. So the decentralized identity is coming to town, so to say. So it will be something that we will need to apply this way or another. I mean, it's just, if we want to do some business from it, we need to, as I said at the beginning, we need to find the right language, because when we start talking about, to the company about DITs and all the different lingo which we use normally and we understand, but they don't, Yeah, obviously. I mean, we are trying to bridge with the projects which we have activated. We try to bridge the lingo which they're using, banks, for instance, and the qualified service providers' signatures. We try to talk about the pieces that they are using in their business today. So, I mean, I'm not saying that we are super successful, yet, but we're getting there. Yeah, this is really, really important. So, this will be yeah.
Okay. I think the battery died. So language is a and this community, and I will lump the decentralized or self-sovereign identity community absolutely into this. But Web3, when you actually talk to the terminology and the language is very tricky and very hard. And for people who don't understand things, usually that becomes frightening and closes down. How do you deal with this? So when you're talking with your clients or potential customers, what's the language that you're using?
I mean, don't talk about DIDs, don't talk about ZK, don't talk about whatever. Just say, hey, we've got something that can put you in compliance and reduce your liabilities cost. And because you don't have to store this data, you don't have to pay for this server maintenance, which costs you this much a year, saving cost. Because you're able to comply, you're still alive. And because in our case the solution is more private, and your Pornhub, for example, your users are not going to run away. So,
who are the departments that are impacted by? So when you bring these technologies, one of the challenges of any adoption, is particularly if it's going to be an efficiency improvement, is potentially someone's going to lose their job, right? There's a potential that whatever their existing process is, if we're going to automate the KYC process or automate some other credential issuance process, someone may be found themselves redundant, or some department might find all of a sudden a revenue source that was part of their P&L is no longer there. Who are you seeing? Who are the people that you're, the parts of the organization that you believe you are impacting, and how are you dealing with that?
And so for us, the strategy with getting adoption is always to do with how can you get much smaller entities to adopt you first before you get any bigger. So if you can find an entity where you can talk to one decision maker, or there's like only 3 key decision makers in the whole organization, just talk to them. You talk in their language, you tell them, hey, this is going to save you cost. Yeah, you're going to lose some of these people. You might lose this revenue stream, but because these regulations are going to come, you're going to lose it anyway, so whatever. And then just make this calculation and run it through. So with big corps, I presume it's going to take a bit more time, maybe a regulatory push or something like this.
Maybe if I give you one example, I mean, probably the position that that people will be losing jobs is probably not the best one to convince, but. We created one thing which was a credential of enrollment. It was the proof that you are enrolled in the university. So it's a project where we included the qualified service provider, who is now the entity which is important in today's world, and the second one was the university, and the third was the rail station. So we here displayed the solution to a problem which exists today. So the users, the students, there are a lot of students who just enroll to the university to get the paper that they are enrolled, and then they disenroll in the next months. But they are using this paper for the whole year, all the benefits of this paper. But for instance, with the story which we did, so the university issues the credential to a user's wallet, and he then presents the credential to the railway station where he buys the student ticket. And what cannot happen today is that he can abuse the credential, because the issuer, the university, can revoke the credential because the user is not enrolled anymore. So this is maybe something that can, if we can calculate the value of this can maybe be then something to convince all the universities and the government that this is something that is trying to build the trust and to eliminate the fraud, or and you can try now to replicate this situation to different verticals and problems, and we can. But yeah, the problem is how to calculate the value now.
That's an interesting, because what you've said is the actual receiver of value, for example, is the train, the transport system. It's not the university.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's looking at it from an ecosystem perspective, it's okay if the railway company reduces the number of fraudulent trips, someone traveling with a student discount when in fact they're not a student, would they cover some of the cost of actually implementing the system? Because it's really the shifting of, it's looking at it from an what's the incentive for the university? They don't really care. They even got maybe some money out of it because you enrolled for 6 weeks or whatever.
So we're talking about ecosystem things. It sounds like something that a government is better positioned to do, meaning effectively what's happening with the EU. They're building the EBSI, so infrastructure, issue, verify credentials. That's great. And now it's up to the individual companies, the university, to actually start issuing these credentials. Presumably this will be simple enough, so they really just have to put a small module in place that issues credentials, and that's it, and then revokes them. And so the bulk of the work is already done, and from that point, it's just a question of getting, for example, the government can mandate the universities to do this because they might still not want to do it because whatever, it's still expending time. You get the universities, you get the hospitals, you get the COVID certificates, you get the visas, you get whatever the government can easily touch on board, and therefore the railway companies are going to use this because the universities are already issuing it, so and they're going to win. And from that point, it sounds like the private sector can take it forward. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean that's like ideal situation, but it's not that easy when you come to the different companies. Yeah, but it is. I mean, it's a question. You know, how much are what's the real business model here? You know, should the issuers be paying for the issuing for the for the component, offering them the issuance of the credentials? We know for sure that users won't be paying nothing for the wallet. You know, the wallet will be given to them, and you know, you cannot monetize the wallet.
I mean, this is one of the challenges within. I mean, this whole idea of reusable credentials. So if I issue you a credential and then I don't, and the challenge and the value of the university issues a student credential of some sort. Really the value that the organization's getting the value is not the university per se, because if the person drops out, but they could reuse the piece of paper somewhere else to get student discounts, the university doesn't see any of that value. So there's not necessarily an incentive for the university to implement the system in the first place. I know the European, since universities are all publicly funded, almost all publicly funded in the European market, certainly in the American context, that obviously isn't true. And there's additional challenges in that some of this stuff is actually a profit and loss center in a university or in a college, and then you're potentially impacting revenue that way. I want to open up, if there's anybody does have any questions or comments or whatever, please raise your hand. We'll get you a mic and include you in the conversation. So, don't be shy. We don't bite, not usually. Please, the more engagement is better for everybody. So if you do have a point or a question, raise your hand and we'll get you a mic.
Michael was thinking about getting another chair, so if anybody would want to join the table,
join the panel.
Do come.
Ecosystems. That's what you talk to anybody in Web3, you're talking ecosystems. Ecosystems are where does the value? How does the value? How are you working with ecosystems or working to define what the value points are?
So I can give an interesting example which also covers the last question, which was how do you actually monetize the system fairly, because the system is implemented on one end, value is created on the other end. And so there's an interesting project called Verified Inc., and they are trying to do reusable KYC. And their model is this. So you're a company, you do KYC, but if you do it through us, and as part of using us, you do your KYC. It's not more so everything's usually, it doesn't cost more, but then at the end you can issue that user with a verifiable credential that they went through the KYC with you, and that credential also includes all the information they need to prove to other people that they can also frictionlessly KYC. And so the incentive for you as a company is, this doesn't really cost me anything else, but if I issue them with this credential, then they reuse it, I'll get a part of the fees that their reusage of this generates. And then the consumer of these credentials also pays a fee. Verified, in this case, that third party takes a cut. But effectively, that's how the private sector has found a way to grow an ecosystem.
I mean, one thing we talked about before about the KYC, it's interesting if you look this as an ecosystem, as you said. You have today, but it's probably because of the law that each bank needs to KYC each user they have. So the bank has cost of, I don't know, 1 million for KYC. What the bank 2 has 500,000, bank 3 has 2 million, etc. So, and with the Web3 pieces which we're talking about here, about the issuing credential as KYC proof and all things which come with this, the banks can share the cost because they don't need to again KYC all the users because they can share on an ecosystem level the KYCs of the bank. So this is something that can really, as a value, can decrease the cost of doing the KYC. But I'm not sure if this would go through on all different markets.
And consequently, this can reward the issuers and then get the whole flywheel started.
It's not so much on the KYC, but in the Netherlands, there is something that I read recently where they are doing it from an identity checking of employees so that they're issuing, and the banks have decided to cooperate with each other such that when they do whatever identity or background checks or qualification checks, that they are issuing credentials or they're proposing to issue credentials to prospective new employees that then will be recognized and used potentially by their competitors, recognizing that people, when they're working in the financial industry, they rarely stay at one institution for their career anymore. They are moving, but that there would be cost optimizations, operational efficiencies for the sector at large if they cooperate with each other versus, and this is not a competitive differentiator. They've made that decision. It's not being a competitive differentiator, that their onboarding processes are more efficient than the next guys. You seeing any of that, from any of your interactions, anything similar where people are starting to see? I know in the U.S., again, taking my background as many years in the U.S., it would never happen. The banks hate each other and they all fight like hell against each other. But everyone outside the U.S., the banks seem to sometimes actually cooperate, realize that there's certain things that it makes sense to cooperate. Never happened in the U.S. But
KYC reusability is certainly a big sector. So there's so many startups trying to solve this problem of verify once, verify forever. And so that's certainly one push because it's a big cost for companies, a huge cost. And at the same time, it's a big pain for customers. So it's a huge pain to actually do these checks all over and over again. When you go to university diploma, the case becomes less strong because sure, I can just send in this one file upload. On the other end, their cost for verification is also lower. And so that's why we're going through these higher cost, higher opportunity segments, but eventually they'll probably spread around the rest.
Inclusion. It's one of the things that's been, it's certainly talked about in the EIDAS regulation. I know the EIDAS is looking to have, I think by 2030, they're expecting 80% adoption within the European Union of the digital identity wallet. And for the first time, the first EIDAS didn't require the member states to report actually how many people actually used it, and the reality is that very few people did. They are required to report statistics as to what the adoption rates are and how they're going to get to 80%. But inclusion is still a big issue because particularly, and I would say it's true in Europe as it is in other areas of the world, there are rural populations, there's areas where digital signals might flat out just not exist. How do you see inclusion? How do you see the benefits, public sector versus private sector? Any thoughts?
I mean, maybe because the standards from the W3C and Open Identity Foundation and these standards enable that this exchange of information between wallets and issuers and wallets and verifiers becomes something that simple, that it can enable simple interoperability between all the entities of a specific story, use case, ecosystem, whatever I call it. So the standards which we follow will help with the inclusion. So yeah. Maybe.
what you talked about, is that inclusion or is that just process efficiency? Because you said interoperability, but isn't this the same as just not doing the same process twice? So am I excluded if I have to do it twice? And consequently, what's the actual inclusion point?
I mean, with specific tech, which, I don't know, specific issuer is using, or you are locked inside a specific, in a specific story, but with the pieces which follow the W3C and these standards, you can unlock the possibilities for others to join. And from my perspective, this can be an answer to the inclusion question from Michael. I don't know. Yeah, but
Inclusion has, and this is something that came to me recently, and it was a bit of a aha moment. I hadn't thought that way, because every time I've had the conversation inclusion, it's all around individuals, right? Someone doesn't have a smartphone, someone lives in a rural area, doesn't have access. Also has actually a corporate context as well, which I hadn't thought of, and I'd like to throw it. I know this is a little bit of a curve, so I apologize. There's over $1 trillion. There's supposedly $1.5 trillion of global trade doesn't happen every year because of the cost of trade, and having identity of a corporation or identity of the people in a corporation potentially expands, or has the opportunity to expand that to include more organizations. So inclusion also has a corporate context in that the cost of doing business might be too high, such that a business is excluded from certain elements of trade or other activities. How do you see, what are your thoughts on that? Because as I said, it was a surprise for me when I read that, and I guess and I know, so we didn't talk about this, so I apologize. So off the cuff, how do you see inclusion from a corporate context?
I definitely see what you're talking about. If you make the process more efficient, then if I'm a supplier or if I'm a company looking for suppliers, I can just look for worldwide supplier instead of American suppliers, just because otherwise it'd be, in the alternative reality, it'd be just too costly for me to do that. I'm seeing this in action with, for example, student discounts. Some platforms, let's say, for example, Notion, only give you a student discount if you have, let's say, an email from a US institution, presumably because it's just easy enough for them to verify US institution, and the rest is like whatever. Yeah.
If you have a .edu email, .edu email, which is a domain that most of the U.S. educational academic institutions use, that's what they're checking. That's all they're checking, is that it's a .edu. Any thoughts, Sebastjan, on that?
You mean like what's a credential? What could be what? Anything that one identity says about another identity could be a credential. So that company saying I was a customer to them for X years could be a credential. Or university, my relationship with it could be a credential. Or KYC, or anything which happened, which is a PDF right now, could probably be a credential and benefit from reduced fraud, high process efficiency, privacy, etc.
Yeah, as he said, everything can be a credential.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's years ago I was working with another startup in the aviation space, and they were in the maintenance, repair, and overhaul. And I learned an awful lot about aircraft and stuff like that that I knew nothing about. But a commercial aircraft generates 11,000 pieces of paper a year, right? Each of those pieces of paper has a certificate of authenticity, saying that the part that was put on the airplane is, created by an organization that is actually licensed to create aircraft parts, and it meets all the specifications and requirements. Those are all pieces of paper, right? All of them. And so the aircraft can't fly unless the airline, the operator, has all those pieces of paper. And so it's a very, very expensive process. It's an ideal candidate of turning all that into credentials, because now you have truly a digital form, not a PDF, right? but there's also enormous resistance because the bar, it's not everybody has to go into the pond or in the pool at once. And so that's some of the problem.
I mean, even if we go to more common uses, even, I don't know, the ticket for a concert or ticket for a game can be a credential. The paycheck that the company is, giving you, the document about your pay can be a credential which you can use, I don't know, at the bank when you're talking about with them about a loan, for instance. This can be, again, something, and all this exchange between bank and me and the company issuing can be automated, and it can be the biggest thing of the credential. The most important thing for me is that it is something that is, you cannot, you cannot fake it, and you can really easily verify the information. So,
okay, I noticed that we're a bit over time. I thank my two panelists. Thank you very much for a very good conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. And hopefully, any questions, please reach out.